You know that feeling when you get really in a nice groove, ideas are fitting together, and I don't know, just like the emotion is there, it's real, it's present, it's really there. And you're finding that sans script, sans rehearsal, you're saying what you wanted to say, you're saying what you felt needed to be said. And yeah, maybe this is even worth saying. And then you get into the edit. And your actual mic wasn't on, and the only thing that you've got is the reference track. Well, this is that video. I could say screw it and try to reshoot the whole thing, but no. Nope. Maybe it would be better if I did. I don't care. So, some apology for the audio that is about to proceed, but no, I am not reshooting this because, for crying out loud, the whole damn thing is about authenticity. And if I'm covering that, if I'm scrapping that for the sake of production value, then maybe I shouldn't be talking about authenticity at all. In a video on creative identity and emotional self-management, specifically navigating depression, Venus Theory requested comment from people more silvered, and I think I qualify literally and metaphorically. Not to put too fine a point on it, just going by dates and ages mentioned in videos. Not to put too fine a point on it, just going by dates and ages mentioned in videos. The year you were born, I was on my first cross-country tour, strictly as a tech, just managing guitars and cables. I've spent a little bit of time nibbling around the edges of the music industry, but I have been in the trenches, in the fray, as it were, in the film industry, and the degree to which it thrives on false hope at a reasonable price that will be going away very soon. So jump on this discount before you miss the boat is very familiar. Very familiar. Actual inroads to the film industry are, well, for the glory-centric positions, they're few and far between. For people who are willing to stick a shovel in the dirt, there's more opportunity and more options if you are in the right place. And if you are in the right place at the right time with the right certifications, and you are willing to field an absolutely ludicrous work schedule that borders on the suicidal. But for people who actually want to be front and center, oh, there are so many traps. There are so many traps. There are so many people who are willing to sell the idea of your big break, your next big break. And in that industry, there is at least a perception that it is kind of all or nothing. Brief tangent, and again, notoriously bad at being brief. Most of my time in the film industry was spent in Canada. Canada has this thing called CanCon, where there are tax incentives, substantial tax incentives for producing Canadian content. There are also CanCon contribution requirements for certain corporations in order to maintain the beneficial relationship that they have with governing agencies. One of the ways that this gets handled, and whoever came up with this is a genuinely awful person. One of the ways that this gets handled is there are a slew of amateur filmmaking contests, usually oriented around short films, where these scrappy, self-funded independent film projects compete with each other for a chance to win some of the money that it took to make the short film back, and a time slot on a cable channel nobody watches to be aired once. But this massive oligopolist telecommunications company puts some money into Canadian content so their tax requirements are met. And this is the way that they take care of that requirement, by putting a slew, and these competitions are fierce. Lots of people jump in on these. Putting these crews together in direct competition with each other in order to get paid some, not a fair wage, not a by no means an industry standard wage, but to get some compensation at all for the work that they have already done. Just for context, for those who may not know, bear in mind, this is an industry where a 12-hour day is a short day. And in independent film production, when people aren't paying attention to labor law quite as much, and where union regulations don't really apply, 18-hour days are not uncommon at all. So you've got people making sleep-deprived, ludicrous workflow decisions, literally racing against the clock in order to hopefully get paid at all for what they're doing. This particular contest that I have in mind also lands in the middle of kind of contest season. There is such a thing. There are people who just, this is all they do. They almost invariably have high earning spouses, because nobody can sustain this as a career, because you don't actually make money. Except the people who rent equipment on the cheap make a ton of money. The people who offer post-production services on the cheap, they make a ton of money. There is a tier of quasi-professional, the folks who haven't quite broken through into the illustrious category of Hallmark movies of the week, can live in a fairly parasitic and exploitational way off of this perpetual churn of, you're gonna work 18 hours a day, 4 days in a row. We're not gonna pay you, but you're gonna get an IMDb credit. And if you're lucky, the catering is halfway decent. So this even gets leveraged in the professional circuit as well, where not so much not at the union tiers, not the folks who are working on TV or a major studio production, because at that point, this trick doesn't really work. But the folks who are still kind of starting out and still a little bit starry-eyed are way too often susceptible to the, aren't we all just so honored to be in the film industry? We are living the dream, people. We are living the dream. I mean, yeah, we were foraging pine cones for lunch yesterday. The circus tent is on fire. 3 of our cast trailers rolled down the mountain, and wolves are chasing us as I am giving this speech. But aren't you honored to be, no, don't even think about calling work safe. Honored to be in the film industry. Yeah, it gets leveraged, it gets exploited to ludicrous degree, and I'm a little surprised at the people who honestly believe that it works. To the main point of survival skills as a creative, I think one of the important keys is recognizing that survival is the stakes that we're talking about, and that it needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be engaged in those terms. I am 45. I have been to far too many funerals at this age, and a disproportionate number of those funerals were related to either self-harm or accidental overdose. I am still here. Many of my friends and people that I have known are not. That is, I think, in part because of the degree to which our culture operates, thrives on, and right now aggressively quantifies and provides real-time feedback on erosive normativity. That this doesn't just apply to basic guidelines for behavior. It drills all the way down into vocabulary. I mean, if you look over time, sociolinguistic normativity is how languages form. It's what primarily differentiates Middle English from Elizabethan English, differentiates Elizabethan English from what we're using today. This process of evolving norms and commonality of use being the primary driver in there. The more frequently a word gets used in a particular way, the more likely it is for that word to stick. We also see phoneme erosion operating along the same lines. Words that don't quite roll off of the tongue, well, we kind of chip off the edges and sand out the corners, and then we wind up with a smoother sounding word, and that's what we stick with. That also applies to meaning, that applies to any number of things, but it also applies to self-representation, emotional communication, and what we do and do not deem acceptable to talk about. That to say, anyone who looks at the world around them and feels like there is some part of their story that has not already been told is already up against a stacked deck. Anyone who feels that so strongly that they feel like they have to get it out, they have to express it, because they've been waiting to hear that song that really hit, that really felt like them, or they've been waiting for the film in which they got to see an idealized version of themselves on screen, and they're still waiting, and it's not happening, and screw it, if you want it, you gotta make it yourself. Anyone who feels that way is definitely on the wrong side of the grinding wheel, or rather, not the wrong side, but they are going to be receiving the business end of a social, a linguistic, a cultural, a normative emotional range, a neurolinguistic, all kinds of just, they're going to be on the receiving end of 1,000 different erosive social devices constantly. And that's not easy. That points to the main way that norms get, well, established and maintained, and that is attrition. The edges get sanded off, which is, I guess, just fine if you aren't one of those edges. So it does genuinely help. At least it has helped me. I'm still here. It has helped to think of it in those terms. Survival. That there are social forces that, even if you have difficulty relating to the kind of a life and death dichotomy in this struggle, survival of the self, survival of integrity, whatever terms you need in order to engage it, but it is survival. We are talking about survival. Thinking about it in those terms helps to frame it at a level of severity at which we are maybe prepared and willing to do what is necessary in order to survive. And that is, first and foremost, take it seriously. Good mental health doesn't happen by just wishing hard. It really doesn't happen as the result of the power of positive thinking. And despite half a dozen memes that I encounter a day that almost invariably result in a block from me. A good walk in the woods is not, in and of itself, a mental health care plan. If you know that you struggle with depression, if alienation is a consistent part of your experience, if you haven't turned this video off already, you need to make a plan. And that is part of your job. That is part of your responsibility as a being who probably has something to say to the world that the world isn't going to hear otherwise. Your first responsibility is to survive. It is worth mentioning that someone who is idealistically heterodox, who is neurologically non-normative, who has cultural, social, or aesthetic values that are particular to them, that are not commonly represented, just being around, still being around, is a fairly powerful act, no matter how limited it may seem. It may not seem like nations are toppling at your feet just because you showed up, and they probably won't be, but erosion works both ways. This is one of the reasons that, for example, we can throw words like neurodivergent around in this day and age, and more than nobody has some idea of what I'm talking about when I throw that word in. Even 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. This is how we make change happen. It's one of the ways. One of the things that helps with survival is make a plan. Full confession, this is coming from a habitual chronic first assistant director, so making a plan is kind of what I do. But when it comes to mental health care, I think it is well worth talking about, and it is an under-discussed component of artistic survival. Is you know better than anybody else what you're fighting. You know better than anybody else what is sitting in the shadows, whispering accusingly or denigratively or condescendingly or what have you. You know what it is. I don't. A really, really, really good therapist, if you win the therapist lottery, might, after you've put some time in, but you already know. You already know what it is, what it's going to say. And what I am proposing is you need to have a plan for what you are going to do when it becomes tempting to listen. You need to know ahead of time, and you need to rehearse this in your mind. What am I going to do? I know where the Band-Aids are. If I cut a finger in the kitchen, I know where the antiseptic is if I nick my chin shaving. I know where the fire extinguishers are in case I really screw up in the kitchen. By that same token, I know what I am going to do if I have a really, really bad night. Through nobody's fault, but bubblings of neurochemistry. If I have a really bad night, I have a plan. I know what I'm going to do. A series of structured self-care activities, self-directed check-ins, and a neurocognitive inventory. And at this point, at 45, I'm pretty good at it. I can run through my checklist pretty darn fast, and kind of like pull myself way away from a danger zone long before it's a serious threat, and that's part of why I'm still here. But to someone who is younger, who has a little less experience, or, and this is a dangerous one, someone who thinks that when the exterior circumstances of their life get better, the battle inside is going to get easier. It's not, okay? It's just not. Get over that right now. What is going to change is that you are going to get better at fighting that battle. If you are significantly younger than me, Um, make a plan. Make a plan, and if you try it, if you have a bad night, you try it and it doesn't work, figure out why it didn't work. Sit down and tinker with your kind of your self-care parachute. It'll just get better with time, not because the battle goes away. The battle does not go away, but you get better at fighting it, and you fight it with better tools. And ideally, you fight it with more effective support from the people around you. Partly because you surround yourself with people who are more effective at supporting, and partly because the people who are around you will get more effective at support. Maybe some of this is handy, maybe it isn't, but cheers.